The first family computer we had as a kid didn't have a modem in it at all. The second computer we got when I was growing up had a 56K modem. And at that point, we started using AOL, America Online, as our internet connection. And in principle, they were supposed to be able to support our 56K connection. In practice, whenever we would dial in with a dial-up modem, it would connect at 14.4. Sometimes, if we were lucky and we retried it a bunch, 28.8 or 33.6, usually 14.4. And these are, of course, not the kind of numbers you hear anymore for broadband. I'll also say there are parts of the country still in parts of the world where dial-up and numbers like that are still just part of using the internet. But I remember we had a conversation with the AOL support people on the phone, even though I was a kid, it still sticks out to me. In which basically we asked, when and how is our city going to get the upgrades? Because we knew the big cities were getting them. Kansas City, not too far south of us, pretty sure their internet was fine. And the representatives, again, now in adult hindsight, I realized they didn't have a lot of control, not representatives to make these calls. Basically, I had to kind of defend the point of, St. Joseph, Missouri couldn't be on their priorities. It's kind of made me feel crummy, right? I didn't like it. And it's actually part of why it's been so important to me. A lot of the members in GameKeto Club, and this is a pattern that can be replicated for other things, for all kinds of other fields, topics, interests. Well, a lot of what we've tried to do is make sure we're supporting people who don't live in giant city centers. Right? Most of our members in our group aren't in the heart of Chicago or New York City or London. They're from a few hours outside of those areas or further. And it's trying to deliver the same kind of experience in a way that obviously, I'm based in Los Angeles. But part of what I try to recreate is through the network of people I can find out here. Bringing those people in as guest speakers. Trying to recreate some of the same kind of vibe as you might get out something like here. Glitch City, Huegos Rancheros in Texas, Baby Castles up in the Northeast. These different kind of groups and communities around the country where there's a critical mass. Where there's opportunities from the ease of finding somebody else who's doing something kind of like what you're doing in a way that I understand is much harder in other parts of the country or involves, and I've spoken, I think Jim Rice was one of our guest speakers who organizes meetups out in a part of the country where there's not a lot of other developers. People would drive from miles around for even a rare meetup. Just because that was the networking options that they had. And, the reason I say critical mass is because even if you can find 10 other game developers, it actually doesn't really help any of you necessarily if somebody's doing some sort of weekend project in Python, somebody's doing an enormous multi-year project in Unreal, somebody's trying to get funding secured to start a business, somebody else is making mobile casual games, and there's nothing wrong with any of those kinds of games, but it's much harder to work together, to collaborate, to speak to experience in a relevant way to each other if you don't get a critical mass of people who are doing things in a way that's in alignment. Which is why within GameKeto Club, we've gone our way to make sure that kind of from the introductory phase and in, we have a process and pipeline so there's alignment between the people involved. People can help each other out, do help each other out all the time as part of the experience. But it tries to recreate that same kind of sense, that threshold of support, of community, of peers that I understand because it's where I grew up. We didn't have access to in the way that I've had the privilege of, not only right now in Los Angeles, before that in San Francisco, before that in Atlanta, to an extent in Pittsburgh, more so because I was at a college there, maybe more so than Pittsburgh, the city per se. But anyway, I've tried to replicate what I can of, it's not that these places are in any way better in any sense. Obviously, they're more expensive. They've got different kinds of challenges. But what I've tried to replicate from them is, again, the kind of culture, the kind of atmosphere, the kind of community that develops when you have so many people that you can find a few dozen, several dozen people who are kind of enough on the same page to really meaningfully connect and help each other out. That's one of the great things about the internet, is that as long as you have even one of these kind of dial-up connections at a lower rate, it's still possible to connect with enough other people and find folks, create that threshold, form that community, even if it's something which otherwise in your local area, you're having a hard time finding those other people. You're having a hard time finding peers, mentors, and so on. So anyway, it's part of what I've committed myself to doing. That's part of why I've committed myself to doing it the way that I have. And like I say, there's a whole bunch of other communities out there too, for arts, for video creation, for story writing, for other stuff. But game development's the one that I live in. Anyway, just want to share that. It's important to me. I think about it. It's part of why we do what we do. It's a lot of people we bring together are basically other folks who also aren't, like I say, in major city centers. Even though we started in LA, a lot of what we've been trying to do is to try to recreate some of the benefit of just the sheer population numbers and recreate that in kind of a more online format, which turns out totally doable. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you tomorrow.